It's Signals and Noise time, a chance to discuss news on and about the media, ranging from paper books to TikTok. And TikTok is one of the topics this month. We welcome back our regulars. Jessie Kretzer-Hartenstein is an assistant professor of journalism and mass communication at Cal Poly Humboldt. Hi, Jessie.
Hi there.
Chris Lucas is an assistant professor in communication, media, and cinema at Southern Oregon University. Welcome back, Chris.
Good morning.
Okay, so let's start with Fox News in the public eye. Couldn't avoid this one. The discovery from the lawsuit filed by Dominion Voting System reveals internal discussions at Fox News about the untruthfulness of claims by Donald Trump and others about the 2020 election being stolen. In those discussions, it's clear that the hosts and producers of opinion shows knew the claims were bogus, but gave them airtime anyway. Let's talk about responsibilities and revelations and the effects, if any, upon Fox News. Jessie?
Yeah, so definitely some responsibility needs to be on Fox News for this. And it's kind of interesting looking at the lawsuit that's happening right now with all of this, because it seems really obvious, like from my standpoint and my knowledge base, it seems so obvious, right, that there is an issue here. They were knowingly spreading basically fake news, but, misinformation, disinformation. And the knowing factor is really key here. And I think that's something it's getting a little bit overlooked. If they didn't know, if it was an accident, we have precedent set that says, if it was not purposeful and there was no malice involved, then it's kind of okay. You don't really get in trouble with that, according to the Supreme Court with our Times versus Sullivan case back in 1964. But there was intent here, as far as we can see, with all of the, the tweets and the internal communication that we're seeing coming out of Fox News and the reporters and producers on that end, that people knew it wasn't right. They did it on purpose. They did it anyway. And so it's kind of a no-brainer from that standpoint. However, having said that, I am often shocked by what goes down in our judicial system these days. So who knows?
All right, Chris Lucas, your initial take on what's been going on with Fox News. There's lots of it.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, it's certainly it can be kind of confusing. I think those of us who pay attention to these stories probably feel a little bit like we're in bizarro world, because the law that was settled in sort of Times versus Sullivan was was meant to protect the press from public officials, right? It would if the public officials were trying to punish those journalists for critical statements or for spreading troubling information that may or may not be complete or even true, right, as new information is coming to light. The justices are like, well, we need to create some space for uncertainty. Well, here we have a case where this supposed news outlet is making false statements that help a public official, right, that extend a false storyline that serve the interest of a politician, a political party. So they're being sued by another private company, right, that's finding itself harmed by what they said. And what I'm really curious about, and I completely agree with Jessie, like I would not even want to speculate how this is going to go given the status of the judiciary. I wonder if that might be the wedge here that makes some space for Fox to bear some consequence for this.
Which gets us in a really interesting zone, because if, in fact, this works its way up to the Supreme Court and they decide that New York Times versus Sullivan is no longer the standard, then the standard could be shifted in a way that American conservatives seem to favor to make it easier to find for libel or defamation, and yet this would go against the conservative news organization. Chris?
As I said, bizarro world. I personally... there are a couple of justices, Gorsuch and Thomas, I think, who've expressed some interest in revisiting, and revisiting Times versus Sullivan. I guess I'm kind of doubtful that'll happen. I wouldn't be surprised or even necessarily all that troubled if there was, some revision to this law that would require news outlets to sort of contextualize statements that they know to be false. And that, of course, can be very tricky in itself. But, I don't know. I think we're in an era where misinformation, disinformation is becoming so rampant, I do think we're going to have to rethink some of these standards.
Jesse, do you think they provided themselves a cloverleaf at Fox by saying all we were doing was putting the arguments out there? I mean, the president of the United States is raising the issue, so we have to report on that. I mean, Fox News is pretty good. Its lawyers are too, I think, at doing things like making sure that really inflammatory headlines end with question marks.
Yes, and so much of that is in the framing, right? Just as you said, with we're not saying this is true. We're just giving it a lot of airtime and putting it out there into the universe. So yeah, they definitely do kind of, cover their butts in that way. And what we know, though, and what the research has shown over and over again is that with misinformation and disinformation, even if it's later proved to be false and fake, once it's out there and once people are basically creating those neural pathways in their own minds about it, it's really hard to undo that and untie that. So it's still going to, have that effect on society and on individuals, whether Fox is covering their butts or not.
One of the things that really struck me in all of this, though, is the concerns given by the likes of Tucker Carlson and others in texts and emails about, we could be losing our audience over this. But what they're concerned about is they're going to lose their audience by telling them the truth. I can't remember ever seeing a news organization express that concern, at least that it got conveyed to the public that way.
Yeah, and it's kind of frightening, right? And we saw this actually in the last election when Fox called Arizona for Biden, and then suddenly a bunch of their viewers are no longer there, right? They disappeared because they didn't like the factual information that they were getting. They wanted to just hear what they wanted. And so, yeah, it definitely, financially is going to have an effect on Fox when that's sort of one of their main bases. Not to say that's everyone who pays attention to Fox News, but that there certainly was sort of, a large portion of their audience that went, wait, no, we don't like the truth. We don't like the facts. Give us what we want. Otherwise, we're not going to tune in.
Chris, is that basically saying, we realize that our audience doesn't want the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
This is, I think, a problem that we've really seen emerge, and I, without putting what I hope is not too blunt of a point on it, I see it as this erosion of the boundary between what we traditionally saw as this firewall between kind of the publisher and the newsroom, right? The publisher wants to tell the audience what it wants to hear because that brings in the eyeballs and appeases the advertisers and so forth. The role of journalism as a profession, as a set of standards and rules and processes, we're meant to kind of hold a line between that value and this sort of value around accuracy and so forth. And I think to my eye, Fox is this story is what happens when you see money starting to run the journalism, and Rupert and his son Lachlan, who clearly are taking a lot of interest in what is on that channel moment to moment, which does not seem healthy to me.
All right, let's take on another concept here on Signals and Noise with Chris Lucas and Jessie Kretzer-Hartenstein, and that is what's going on with TikTok. A federal government and other governments are requiring the app to be removed from agency phones for fear that the app will transmit sensitive information to the Chinese government. There's some pressure for TikTok to be sold to a non-Chinese company. Chris, thoughts on this?
Well, we're just taking the small issues today. So I really thought, we had that congressional hearing a few days ago, which was sort of embarrassing in some ways to reveal the poor understanding of these technologies by our elected officials. I hope their briefings are getting better. I think being careful about where that app is makes a lot of sense to me. But it's not necessarily because it's TikTok and connected to China in that way. We're almost 20 years into the social media era. We're 8 or 10 years into kind of the era of algorithmic sorting of everything we're seeing on these platforms. And TikTok is using a lot of the same practices that Meta is using, that Google is using. So that kind of the hoovering up of all of our data is not the new piece, but I do think we should be really thoughtful about that. The difference, of course, is that TikTok's parent company is clearly required to be somewhat deferential at some level to the ruling party in China. and we don't really know how deferential they are, and that blind spot is creating all kinds of speculation. And I think, that's something that's getting out of hand, but they are definitely valid questions.
So, Jessie, without the Chinese presence, are we not having this conversation, basically?
To some degree, however, as Chris kind of touched upon, we were already having these conversations with U.S.-owned companies.
Mm-hmm.
With Facebook, we had the congressional hearings, and so the conversation is still there. But of course, yes, that's the bizarro world part of it, is all of the speculation on what could happen. Though I totally agree with what Chris is saying. Like, yes, there's some questions there, and I personally don't see any reason why, the Biden administration putting the ban on it for devices that are, government devices. Sure, that makes sense, from a national security standpoint. But going beyond that, talking about banning it entirely, it's such a meta narrative to me that looking at this, that we're sitting there going, well, we don't like what China does, but maybe we should turn around and do exactly what China does. And we should censor free speech, and we should put a firewall on things so that people can't access it. And, it's just it's ludicrous. It's that bizarro world that Chris mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
I think we need to have this, kind of back out and have this bigger picture. And we really see, not to get too 30,000 foot, but I think there's a great power competition that's happening here that's been focusing for years around information. And the fact is, we're all leaving digital breadcrumbs all over the internet. We're like, Pigpen from the Peanuts comics.
Right.
Like clouds of data we're leaving behind. Our movements, our transactions, our engagement, our communication, and a lot of people are getting access to that. And what I really see is, it started really with the Trump administration, actually, and Biden are beginning to use technology policy and industrial policy as a kind of foreign policy intervention. And it's not just around TikTok. So I think TikTok is just a symptom of this, but it's just this whole thing about the computer chip supply chain. It passed without a lot of comment, but last year, part of the military authorization bill, they're trying to intervene somewhat in how Hollywood is editing films to be given access to the Chinese market.
Right.
I think there's a little bit of hand waving going on there, but it's still an interesting moment to see them recognize that Hollywood is definitely trying to serve that market and get back in after years of sort of declining access.
Oh yeah, it's a good point to add to that. But a lot of things that we do that we do differently with the Chinese, for sure, with media and technology. We got about a minute and a half left. Let's do a pick three, 45 seconds each. Jessie, Kretzer, Hartenstein, start us off.
Yeah, so in the realm of kind of looking at misinformation and disinformation as we are today, I was just turned on to a few games that were developed to actually kind of combat that and to sort of mildly inoculate people to make them more media literate. And one of them is called Bad News. Another one is called Go Viral, and that's looking at misinformation about COVID-19. There's one called Breaking Harmony Square, another one called Cat Park. So that's my little game section on that. If you want to work on your own media literacy, that's a great place to go. Another one in the same vein are just fact-checking websites. This is I pick this month. We need this. So there's lots of different ones, NPR, Fact Check, or Snopes, or factcheck.org, those kinds of things. And then as a fun one, there's a podcast called Ear Hustle, and that's basically bringing stories to the rest of us from life inside prison, shared by prisoners who are living it, and then those who have been released post-incarceration. Okay. And this one, my father actually just turned me on to it, and he is not a crier, and he said every episode he hears, he ends up getting all teared up. So check that one out.
Chris, 30 seconds for your pick three.
Same vein as Jessie, I'll encourage people to check out the Electronic Frontier Foundation website. They have a lot of tools on protecting yourself on social networks. And then I'll just encourage people to go check out the Varsity Theater website. There's an upcoming week-long series of documentaries programmed by the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. Great films. Check them out.
All right. Thanks so much for another great Signals and Noise. Jessie Kretzer Hartenstein from Cal Poly Humboldt, Chris Lucas from Southern Oregon University. Talk to you next month.
Thanks a lot.